is
in
a home
progress.
buying seminar. So this is something that I used to do more pre-COVID. I would do in person, but the rise in Zoom conferences has made it a lot easier to do because you can reach a lot of people all at once. So this is a way to inform your buyers on what the process looks like. You know, we see this every day. It's very foreign to buyers, and that's what can cause some nerves and sometimes some tension and friction. So I try my best to just explain the process end to end to them. And even if they don't decide that buying is the right that they're buying right now, or if they don't decide, hey, we're kind of putting the home buying thing to the side, or I have a cousin who's a realtor, you usually get some sort of referral from it. So the last time that I did this was when COVID had just hit, and I've since closed 3 transactions from doing this. So it's definitely effective. And another nice thing about it is I usually send it in an Eventbrite link. So I get all of their information, and then I can put them into Command and put them on a smart plan and kind of get the ball rolling with how, long-term prospecting. So what I'm going to be doing, it's a little difficult because we don't have a ton of people in here, but even if people want to chime in on Zoom, I'm just going to basically present this as if you were the buyers so that you can get an idea. If you have questions, jump in at any point. I'd like this to be as interactive as possible, but I get it. But if you don't have any questions, you might know this stuff already, obviously, because you guys are all agents. So this is Matt. Attorney Popolo may be chiming in, but again, he is in Florida, so there's a chance that he may need to reschedule, but he'll be here tomorrow to discuss contracts. Matt, if you want to introduce yourself and just explain a little bit.
So Matt McDonald, I'm a first-year loan officer over at Premier Mortgage Lending in Salem, New Hampshire. Kind of go over the lending side of the buyer's transaction today. That I feel like is the most foreign part to the buyer, especially if they've never bought a home before. They don't even know where to begin. So that's kind of where I'll kind of help you guys what we kind of expect if you're the first point of contact, and what to say to them, what my expectation would be of what they know coming into it, and just kind of going over that aspect of the process with you guys.
And it's a good way to network with lenders and attorneys, which is another way to kind of just get more business long-term. So Matt is a lender that I've just recently met, but I've done this with other lenders. I've done this with multiple attorneys, and it's always usually a good way to kind of just get in front of people, and they're always usually interested. And this is also, again, something you can do in person now that COVID restrictions are lessening. You can do this in person. You can host a lunch. I've done it over a paint night, just kind of very informal. You can kind of do it however you'd like it. But now that we, again, are doing more things over Zoom, this is a very easy way to get in front of a lot of buyers. So we'll start. So I start with, who are we and what are we talking about? Because if you are a buyer, you want to know who I am and what I'm talking about. So I'm Sarah Petrozelli. I am a realtor at Keller Williams in Andover. I started selling in 2015. I started selling over at Lair Realty Partners under my parents' team, and then moved over here in 2019 or 18. I can't remember quite. Matt, he kind of already introduced himself a little bit. He's a first-year lender. And Attorney Popolo, if he is available and does end up jumping on, he's been a licensed attorney since 2014. He does specialize more in estate planning. So if you know anyone that, is looking for estate planning, certainly go see him, but he would normally be here to present to the buyers all of the breakdown of the contracts. So we'll do our best without him. Hopefully he joins, and if not, no biggie. So before we get started, these are disclosures explaining the difference between types of agency. As I'm sure you're all aware, this is required before you have any conversation with the buyer. So I like to kind of get this up front. Once I have their information from the Eventbrite link, I send them an email immediately just with the disclosure, because that way you've covered your bases. They've seen it, and it's a requirement anyway. And it's also kind of a nice way to just explain it to the masses, the different types of agencies, what it means to them, why it's important. And at this point, you have questions?
Yeah. When you submit the agency form to a buyer,
Yes.
If you're signing up with a buyer, having a buyer sign up with you to just find me a house that I want, not need that. You need that form, or you only need it when you found a house that you're going to. Because the way that form reads, it's for a specific property.
Well, this is not for a specific property. So I'll look over here. So I have New Hampshire and Mass because I'm licensed in both states. This is required if you even just have a lunch meeting with somebody. Okay. So the disclosure is required because they need to know what your interest is. So whether it's, you know, I represent the seller and you're having a meeting with me as a buyer, then obviously I'm looking out for the best interest of the seller because that's who I represent.
Right.
This is just explains in, you know, kind of very decently detailed information on what the different types of agency is, and you want to get comfortable being able to explain that. You know, like I'm hired by the seller, but I think what you're thinking of is the exclusive buyer agency agreement, and that doesn't have.
No,
to
not
be-
the agreement, the disclosure, the agency disclosure. In
Agency
other
disclosure.
words, if I'm just talking to you, let's say, you know, we find out I'm a realtor
Yeah.
and we're at a party, and you just start talking to me about the market, I don't need that form, it's my understanding. But as soon as you said, you know, now that we've talked, I'd like to talk to you about selling my house at 123 Main Street.
Mhm.
At that point, because now we're talking about your property, I gotta whip that form up.
I do think that you may be correct. I do think that it's kind of up for debate. 'Cause in my classes, like if I quote Andy Consoli, he says it should be at the first business meeting. So it doesn't necessarily need to be subject to a property. It just needs to be at the first business meeting, whether that's a phone call, whether that's a Zoom call, whether that's in person. So that's just something that you want to keep in mind. That's why I like to just put it out here just to cover my bases and I send it over to them. I don't need it really signed by them, but I need, if I'm ever, you know, pegged to tell the state, like I sent this to them, you know, so that's just something that you want to kind of keep in
And
mind here.
Sarah, I can't really see it.
Oh, no.
One of them is just New Hampshire and the other's Mass.
Yes,
Is it
one's New
okay?
Hampshire, one's Mass. They generally have just about the same information.
Yes.
It's just different forms for different states.
Interesting.
Yeah, I like the way New Hampshire is lined up a little bit better because it's helpful to an agent, especially a newer agent. Because it's explained right in black and white, right now you're a customer and to become a client, you know, this is what you need to do. And it's a nice segue into the buyer agency agreement. Because then you can get them under contract and then you're kind of good to go. You can kind of use the same, oh, of course this would happen, sorry. Let me just pull this back up here. But you can kind of, so when I got my New Hampshire license, I started to kind of use that for Mass as well, just that kind of framing.
Yeah.
Because it's a nice way, again, to segue into getting them under contract, and that's obviously the goal. You want to get them under contract because, you know, you don't work for free and there's no guarantee that, you know, that they couldn't just go to somebody else. So it's a nice segue.
Hey, Sarah?
Oh, me? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, real quick. With this particular disclosure, what if I got a phone call out of the blue, and someone was talking to me about real for a particular property? Can I have that discussion?
Can you have what?
If someone calls me out of the blue and says, I want to talk to you about a specific piece of real. Does this, I mean, can I have that conversation?
I think the form says face to face. And unfortunately,
I don't like to risk it. So my
Oh,
advice would be if I get a phone call, I would just say, okay, no problem. I'm gonna shoot you an email with the state required disclosure. You don't have to sign it. It says right at the top, it's not a contract. But here you go, just to cover your bases, because I do know that that is up in the air, whether it's the first business meeting, and you don't want to be in a situation where you're having to explain. Because usually if you're having to discuss that disclosure, it's usually because something went wrong. So my advice would be to, if you're getting a phone call, you have someone that wants to talk to you about real estate, just ask for their email and then you have it. You can put it in your database and you can.
And send it over before you actually meet them.
Yeah, I would, if I'm meeting them in person, I usually bring it just so that they're more comfortable and I can explain it thoroughly to
Yes,
them.
yeah.
But if I'm just gonna have like, kind of the nature of today is it's easier people's schedules, honestly, to meet over Zoom, I would send it just to be safe. Always better to be safe than sorry, because if you, again, are having a dispute over this form, it's usually not good.
Yeah.
So you would rather be safe than sorry. That's why there is some argument whether, okay, is it subject to if I'm just talking about your specific property, or is this something that, you know, I'm gonna have to, I can wait to give you, like, I would just do it right away. Cause that's how I interpret it, is that it should be done right away. So, step one, my mock buyers. If you don't know what your budget is, you can't look. If you start looking at, you know, $500,000 homes, and then you go and talk to Matt, and Matt says, oh, you qualify for 400. That $100,000 difference is gonna make a huge difference in the inventory that's available to you. It also, depending on the type of loan, not every house is FHA, you know, approved. Not every, like certain condos if they're looking. So there's certain things that I always refer to a lender. You should definitely network as agents and have trusted lenders, because just like anything, you know, not all lenders are great. That can really, muck up a transaction. So this is where I'll kind of leave it to Matt. He'll be able to kind of, review some things like as he would if you guys were a group of buyers. For you.
Awesome. So when you come to me at Premier Mortgage Lending, I'm gonna start you off with an application. Okay, so that's what we call a 1003, which is just your basic application to apply for the loan. It's gonna ask for a lot of basic information, your name, phone number, social security, past addresses, past employment, a lot of things just to verify assets, debts, and everything about your financial situation is essentially gonna be in that form. Okay, once you fill out that form, I then pull your credit with your verification, and then we can get started on what we call a pre-approval. You may have heard of a pre-qualification before versus a pre-approval. They are a little bit different. We at Premier Mortgage, we pre-approve. We don't pre-qualify. So we make the buyer's offer a little bit stronger with that. Okay, so all that is, or the only difference we'll kind of go over more in detail later, is pre-qualifying just means that we'll possibly lend you this amount. Pre-approval is you're going to get approved for this amount.
Yeah, it's just subject to the property.
Right,
Yeah.
right, subject to that property. So with this, it's very, as it says here, very important to get a credit report on you, since all programs are determined by your credit score. As you guys probably know, the higher your score, the better interest rate, better programs you're gonna get involved in. With an application taken, I can run numbers, get quotes for you, and it's very important to talk to me since there's a lot of misinformation out there. You wouldn't believe the amount of times I get called saying like, my friend got this interest rate, why don't I get that? It's two very, very different things, right? Especially if it was 3-4 years ago, even this time last year, like rates change every single day. And I think we need to educate buyers on that. And honestly, our side included, where just because the rate is 2.6 today doesn't mean it's going to be 2.6 tomorrow. And they're always fluctuating. So everyone's situation is different. And then there's a lot of misinformation about how to qualify. So if you're qualifying for a conventional loan, some people think you need X credit score when you really need Y. So it's just educating. And again, that's my job, to educate the buyer on that topic there. So the types of loans, the two biggest types that I deal with are conventional and FHA. FHA loan allows for 3.5% down payment on 1 to 4 family homes. It's definitely more lenient with credit scores. We go down to a 620 to qualify for it. And the debt to income ratio is a little higher. We can actually go up to 55% for debt to income, versus conventional is a 45%. So it does allow a little more leeway. Conventional loan, we have a 680 credit score as the minimum. Okay. If you're a first-time home buyer, especially if you have a lot of buyers that are first-time home buyer, this is where I would want you to say, hey, you could possibly put 3% down on a house. You don't need 5% down. Because I think that intimidates a lot of people. They think they have to put 20% down, actually, but that's just not the case. So I when we go over expectations, I think that's something that if they're meeting with you first, definitely that's something that I would like to be laid down is, hey, you don't need 20% down to buy a house. It's definitely a huge myth out there. You don't need that at all. And then pre-qualified for pre-approval, pre-qualification certificate that issues, that certifies, I've obtained a credit report on you, reviewed your income and debt profile, and then that's generally needed when you're presenting an offer. We go a step further, we pre-approve you, and that means that you're essentially, your loan's ready to be submitted. So once the offer gets accepted, you have a house under contract, I can essentially submit your offer and we can get that turn time really quick. So you get your loan closed faster. Obviously in this market, it's a pretty big deal if we can get that done.
And we'll be talking more about how to be a competitive buyer, which obviously will be beneficial.
I got a quick question for you.
Oh, yep.
With FHA versus conventional, I've seen that some sellers have a stigma with FHA offer versus conventional. Does an FHA long close, or are there more restrictions?
So from my end, an FHA loan, the appraisal process is a little different. And then honestly, there's just a stigma on the type of buyer that needs to qualify for it. So sellers just get really worried that the financing isn't actually going to go through on an FHA loan, where if you're qualified for a conventional loan, generally your financial situation is very different than that of an FHA loan. And the loan's probably going to go through faster, little bit more smoother than that of an FHA.
It's also, if you're from the, like, we're talking about buyers, but from the listing perspective, I wouldn't say it's a stigma. It's kind of just, if you're on the list side, their job is to see what kind of loan is most likely to get approved. The strongest buyer wins. That strongest buyer doesn't always necessarily win on price. Obviously, in this market is insane, but to that, I mean, I've had offers accepted at a lower price point because they were stronger buyers. They're putting more money down. And FHA, you know, as an agent, you know that, you know, there is a higher likelihood of it falling apart than a conventional, in my opinion. But, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a stigma. It's just kind of, if you're up against and you're competing like almost all buyers in this market, a conventional loan is gonna be more competitive than an FHA loan. Did that answer your question, George?
It did, thanks.
No problem. So again, I would highlight during this mock home buyer presentation, if you do it for your buyers, that it does take a team, which is part of why I have Matt here and Attorney Popolo would normally be here to kind of just explain, you know, we want to set their expectations correctly, because I think that, again, I can't stress that enough. You need to know a little bit about the lending process. You need to know a little bit about the legal process. You kind of need to know a little bit about everything, because you're their first point of contact. So you need to be able to reassure them. You need to be able to tell them, you know, what's a non-issue, what is an issue, because you'll have people calling, crying, flipping out over something that you know is very like, oh, no, this is not something you need to be upset about. And that is kind of just where you'll see that repeat referral business, when you can guide them, because it is a highly emotional process. And I can't stress that enough for buyers, as I'm sure you're aware. But I do stress that when I'm on the mock home buyer when I'm on the normal home buying seminar, I will stress kind of that it is an emotional decision, but you really want to work with a realtor that's going to guide you and have kind of their emotions removed and help you make a smart decision. So after you get pre-approved, the next step would be to go look at houses. This is something that I had done when COVID was kind of first ramping up. We didn't know a ton about it. Everyone had to wear masks and gloves and the whole nine to showing. So I will kind of it's changed a little bit, but once you're pre-qualified by a lender, it's much easier to look at houses. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, the market is still very busy. What the virus has changed is how homes are shown. So I kind of just put a tidbit of mask required. Some listing agents require disclosures to be completed prior to showing. Some listings are showing strictly virtually for open houses, and almost all listings are requiring a copy of the buyer. Oh, can you see Tony saying shit? Sorry. But basically, this is again where I would set their expectations. I want them to know what they're getting into. I don't want them to kind of show up, because sometimes people will text me and say, oh, I'm heading to the showing, like, do I have to bring anything? And I just try to set the expectation for like, so that they know what they're getting into a little bit. It's hard to kind of grasp the whole scope of it, but that's just something. Oh, yeah.
Disclosures to be completed prior to showing.
That was when we were doing the COVID disclosures. Yeah, so that's again where this needs some updating. And you will, as you do more mock home buyer seminars, if you decide to do this for yourself, you'll have to tweak it along the way. You know, like sometimes it's a different lender, sometimes it's a different attorney. So those are all things that you kind of want to change. So this is where I like to kind of explain, because this is when they have the most questions. So step 3, you find a house. After step 2, you look at houses. You find a house you love. You want to put an offer in. Again, this highlights Mass and New Hampshire. I'm really going to try and focus more on Mass, but I just want to move over here so you can see. So I just like to explain the difference between a contract to purchase versus a purchase and sales agreement. In Mass, buyers submit a contract to purchase, and if it's accepted and after home inspection, which is questionable in this market because home inspections are getting waived left and right, the seller are able to come to terms. A purchase and sales is written by the buyer and seller's attorneys. So that is the biggest difference. In New Hampshire, the buyer submit a purchase and sales as the offer, and if it's accepted and buyer and seller are able to come to terms after a home inspection, buyer's attorney works with seller's attorney on an addendum to a purchase and sales for repairs, reductions, closing costs, etc. In New Hampshire, there's significantly less attorney involvement as far as purchase and sales goes, because it's the first thing you do. It's a boilerplate templated contract, and in Mass, it's really attorney driven. So you do the contract to purchase, you give it all to the attorneys. They kind of duke it out between the closing attorney and selling attorney. And then that purchase and sales is written. All you really do is maybe circulate it for signatures. In New Hampshire, you have to be comfortable in knowing these contracts or have a relationship with an attorney you feel comfortable with. If you don't, so that you're giving them the right information. because it's very important that your buyers understand what they're signing. I can't stress that enough. It again goes back to setting expectations. If you're gonna do one thing in real estate, it's just learn how to set appropriate expectations. You want to keep it positive, you want to keep it light, but you want to be realistic with them, and you want to do it in such a way that doesn't discourage them, but has their expectations set. So what is outlined in the contract of purchase and purchase and sales agreement, which I'm sure you guys know, but again, a buyer wouldn't, is timeline, deposits, offer price, and special requests. Sorry. Let me see. Oh yeah, here you go. I think I just have to stand over here. So what you're going to see in the contract of purchase and sales agreements are the amount you're offering to pay, your down payment, and at what increments it will be dispersed, your home inspection window, a purchase and sales due date if you're in Mass, because that you're already at the purchase and sales when you're in New Hampshire, what type of loan you have, your financing contingencies, who's the escrow agent, and special requests such as closing costs, personal property, and appraisal limits. This is usually where I'll get a decent amount of questions from buyers. So you just want to either have an attorney or just feel comfortable. And again, we as realtors walk a very fine line between agent and attorney. So it's very important to have a networked relationship with an attorney, because you don't want to be answering questions you don't know. If you don't know, say you don't know and rely on the attorney, because you can kind of get into deep crap because I'm on Zoom. So this is another thing where I'd like to review, because obviously in this market, when people see a home's listed for $450, they may think, oh, I can go in at $430. Obviously, we all know that that's a joke right now. So this is where I try to explain to them how to be a competitive buyer. Obviously, the market may change. So if the market changes, I'll update this slide. But my advice would be to look well below the top of your budget, as prices are super inflated. Escalation clauses instead of a bidding war where acceptable. Not everyone accepts an escalation clause, which I don't fully understand, but an escalation clause is essentially where you would submit an offer. I always ask my buyers, think about, what you're comfortable paying, lowest and highest amount. That way you're kind of immediately cutting to the chase. You don't have to wait for them to ask for highest and best. You're putting it out there to the seller that this is what I'm offering, and I'll pay $1,000 over the highest offer up to, my max, whatever I'm at my maximum comfort level. And then that way, and I also like to write in with proof of second highest offer. That way, instead of going in, 20, 30 over, what if, someone, the other buyer's opinion of price was lower and they, lowballed them, and then you just went 20,000 over for no reason. So that's kind of a way to cover their comfort zone, the buyer's comfort zone, while also making them a competitive buyer. Do your best to not get discouraged. The market climate could change at any time. I also, I can't stress this enough with buyers right now. It's very discouraging out there. So I just try to kind of keep it positive. And, when offers get rejected or things don't work out, I just try to remind them of how important home ownership is and real estate investing is, and just not to lose sight of it. Maybe now's not the time. Maybe we're going to wait. Maybe we got to see a few more houses, but don't be discouraged. Understand that homes are usually priced taking depreciation into account as well as repairs needed. I mean, this isn't always the case, but it usually is. So if you can see that depreciation has been taken into account, maybe it's super dated, maybe, something's wrong that is evident that has reduced the price. Sometimes buyers think, oh, well, I can, do a heavy reduction in price because, X, Y, and Z is wrong. They don't fully understand that, that depreciation is considered when the listing agent came and gave them a price. So just so that, again, they can remain competitive. Know going into your search that the housing market's only gone up in price since COVID. Again, just highlighting how competitive the market is. I also did a sale price versus list price, just to kind of show them that the list price is usually always lower than the sale price. And this is old information, but I pulled the last 90 days in Methuen. So you can kind of see. Oh, you got it.
Yeah, will you just do me a favor, you share your screen again?
Oh, yeah.
When you did something over there,
I did something.
you took it off.
Why does it say post?
When you take that graph, guys, off of MLS and things like that, like she said, I would just pull the last 30 days.
Yeah.
In this type of market, because it's changing so rapidly, and especially with the appraisals and what we were talking about with Cheryl and everything, that's starting to be the game changer a little bit in the industry, where they're not coming up with that appraising number. So people either have to be coming up with the cash, they have to have that conversation with their lender, if over that 20%, and they can do a different loan structure to put more money in, do something if it's over that amount. So, and that's a great graph to explain to people right now in this market because of that.
Yeah, it just shows a visual.
In fact, you start this, you're saying the last 30 days as opposed to the last 6 months.
I mean, I would do, it's changed right now, it's this, and I know that, we talked about it with the lending portion. What we're seeing is, you know, a lot of appraisers are being challenged and being asked to get another appraiser out. So a long time ago, the appraisers used to work for the bank, like the bank had a list, and they would say, let's send out Larry, Sue, this one, that one. But now it's not like that, it's kind of like a Russian roulette where the lending just has to pull from like almost like a third party, and they send someone.
Yeah.
And they're not partial to the lending anymore. That there is challenges happening because the agent will say, well, wait a second, I pulled all these comps and it shows that this would support this house to be 750. Where are you coming up with 690? And then they'll go get another appraisal done. And that appraisal now will be against this appraisal, and then they'll start to try to figure out, what did you pull? Oh, whether you add this and this into it, it could rise up to at least this amount. So the appraisers are actually trying to help one another in some bizarre way to still sustain this seller's market. But it kind of is declining.
Definitely.
People just don't see it because
Yeah.
they're just so busy in on it. So for me personally, I would say the 30-day one when you're doing a buyer or listing presentation, because what they care about is what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
But in the industry a long time ago, we were pulling 3 months of sold.
Well, because
So
it's
with the
none.
lender,
Because it was none. Yeah.
and right now, it's like, it's so out of control. that
Yeah.
You can't even set a buyer's expectation or a seller's. Like, honestly, I'm dealing with my friend right now who's listing her house in North Andover, and I have to refer to an agent here. And I wanna.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, listen, I'm like, I know you wanna list it at $699. And I know that you're playing, real estate agent after hours. And you're going on and thinking, because this
I
one,
know
this
why it
one,
won't
this
work.
one, this one, it's $699. But I'm telling you, you should put it on at $679. And the buyers will dictate what it's worth.
Yeah.
And if we can get it north of $750,
Great.
because in her head, she's like, it's gonna be way over $750. It's gonna be $850, girlfriend. You know what?
Send it.
The lender's gonna turn around and say, it's this. So the lending appraisal, a third party bank, the bank's gonna
Is
say
this-
this.
This
And
message I'm gonna
unless
try to
you're,
share.
and again, this is why it's important to understand buyers. When you're bringing in all those buyers and you see somebody that's putting down more than that 20%, where it's 30 or 40, there can be fluctuation with the lending or what they're taking, because they have cash over here that maybe they can change the loan and make the difference up and pay the delta. But if they don't have that, which is now what we're starting to see, you're starting to see it on Facebook. A lot of agents in these private groups here locally are like, it's not appraising, it's not appraising, it's not appraising. So that means still protect your buyers, still put the appraisal language in there. I don't think you should be denying it. Cap it, say they're willing to pay up to
Thank you.
10,000 of a difference
Yeah.
from the appraisal amount if needed.
That was gonna be my suggestion.
And
That's what we've
so
been
you
doing
can
a
put
lot.
a caveat in there and say, you know, and I said to my girlfriend Jen, I go, yeah, fine, somebody can come in here for 800. And once they come in for 800, you can put a caveat that says, with the appraisal, if the appraisal comes below 800, I'm willing to pay $20,000 over the appraisal amount.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's still gonna be less than 800
Yeah.
that they're offering.
Yep.
They still want the property, so they're trying to be aggressive, so they're putting that little piece in there to say, we're willing to pay 20,000 more than what's really valued at. Because of that.
Yes.
It is a very specific market.
Just can't.
It's right now, it's North Andover House, and it's actually in Andover, North Andover, it's happening a lot too.
Yeah.
And I just think it's because of the wealth. I think that the properties, the wealth of the way that it's been so out of control. Now they're starting to bring it back.
Mhm.
Doing the inside appraisals, which
The desktop appraisals. I had one come in low on my listing.
a drive-by, beep, beep, let me do a drive-by.
Yeah, they don't even drive by. They just pull the information. And I had a property again where you kind of also, for a buyer, you have to advocate for them. Because I told the lender, I'm not crazy about a desktop appraisal because this property has been improved significantly. So I hope that you're taking my virtual tour into consideration and you're actually looking at what's been done to the property. It came in low, but to be completely honest, I do think that sellers' expectations, as Jamie kind of has highlighted, are a little out of control. And as part of being a realtor with your buyers and your sellers is finding a way to have those hard conversations nicely without offending them, without, I try to understand and kind of level with them to a certain degree, but at the end of the day, like, I'm the one that's looking at the numbers, I'm the one that's looking at the market, and I get paid on a percentage basis. Of course, I want this to sell as high as possible, but I also have to be realistic because I always keep in mind the appraisal. I've also had instances where an appraisal came in and it came in at value, and then the bank sent another appraisal out and it came under. And then it became an issue on the buyer's end because my buyer didn't want to pay more. This was also a couple of years ago, so it was a little bit more flexible. My buyer didn't want to pay more than what the property was valued at. And the seller had it on their side that, well, I have an appraisal here that it appraised out. And luckily we were able to close, but it can get a little sticky. But I try to just highlight some ways to be a competitive buyer. Again, it's usually spurs the conversation. So each slide, it's not like I'm just reading from it and, boring them to death. I try to keep it as interactive as possible and just kind of have them ask their questions, especially because they have a lender, they have an attorney here. And I think Attorney Popolo is on the call now. I believe so.
Yes.
So, yeah, okay, perfect. So.
I am here. Yep.
Oh, hi. So step 4 is the home inspection. So I like to go over this with them because there are obviously costs associated with buying a home that people aren't prepared for. Not prepared for, they just don't know. You don't know what you don't know. So I like to go over the cost of a home inspection roughly. Depending on the size of the home and the state you're buying in, a home inspection can cost anywhere between $300 and $850. They are well worth the money. I like to discuss the timeline. So in most cases, buyers have 10 days from the time of an accepted offer to have the home inspected prior to the purchase and sales being due. Again, that's in Mass. A big part of my job is to make sure the timeline is adhered to in order to protect your deposit. A shorter timeline is more competitive. Obviously, in this market, if you can get a home inspection contingency accepted, if you can get it done as soon as possible, it's obviously more competitive. In New Hampshire, it's not like Mass. In Mass, the seller is responsible for the Title V. They have to have that inspected in order to sell. In New Hampshire, it's on the buyer. It's very live free or die. So you can, the buyer's responsible for having a septic system inspected. I've had at least 3 or 4 septics fail, which honestly is what you want. And I say this to buyers as well, you can add it. You almost want the septic to fail in a septic inspection in New Hampshire because you're more likely to get a brand new septic. I mean, they're not going to remarket their home and say, oh, the last transaction fell apart because my septic failed and I don't want to fix it. They're a lot more likely to work with it. You'd rather have it fail than have it be like, oh, it's okay, but it's starting to go. Because if it's functioning, seller won't really do anything about it.
You're saying in New Hampshire, you'd like to have it fail?
In New Hampshire, I mean, in Mass, because it's the seller's responsibility. But in New Hampshire, it's definitely on the buyer, and obviously septic issues are not cheap. Well, that's New Hampshire. Live free or die, baby. So, negotiating. So I like to discuss this because, again, I'm sure you guys have some experience. And when you have a buyer come through and you have the home inspection, sometimes they watch a lot of HGTV. They might, watch a lot of movies and think, oh, I could take, 50 grand off the price because we had a crappy home inspection. I try to just set their expectation again to be realistic. So a repair list or a price reduction. Usually the seller is willing to accommodate fixes for problems that arise at a home inspection. The issues would normally be pretty significant to warrant a price reduction. A contribution towards your closing costs. In lieu of repairs, you can ask the sellers to contribute towards your closing costs. Again, we'll be discussing with the buyer's closing costs after. He'll be able to discuss that a little bit. I also like to emphasize that every house has something. Know going into your home search that every home needs something. So keep your comfort level for repairs in mind when you're placing an offer. If you're somebody who's not the most handy person, you're not, and you're looking at a house that needs to be completely renovated or has some major issues, don't put an offer on that property. Kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at the house. You can, and their agent, you can kind of give them an opinion of what you think the condition of the home is and kind of, have your offer reflect that. I also like to stress to them, because I'm sure any agents in here that have some experience have gotten the call after the fact and said, I've been in here a month and something happened. They didn't catch at the home inspection and they're angry. a home inspection is very thorough, but they can't peel the walls back. They can't see absolutely everything, and they can't foresee the future. You know, something, you know, the water heater might be fine and functioning, but fully depreciated. They can't tell you that it's gonna, you know, it could fail in a month from now. So that's just something that you want to kind of, again, set the expectation for that. And just because you set the expectation doesn't mean they're going to listen to it, but you can go back and say, hey, remember when I said this? It kind of makes it cool down a little bit. So that would be kind of negotiating. We're also going to have a class about negotiating that I'm super excited for, and I hope I can get enough people in the market center on Thursday about negotiating. It's going to be, yes, it's going to be a good time. I'm super stoked. We're going to break the people into rooms. And I'm going to make you guys do some work. You're going to be talking to each other. It's going to be a good time. So step 5, this is where Tony comes in. This is where I like to just emphasize again that I'm a realtor. I am not an attorney. I do deal with contracts, but I am not the expert on them. I think attorneys spend what, Tony, a whole year learning about contracts, 2 years?
Yep. We an entire six of law school is devoted to contracts.
So again, you want to, you know, rely on an attorney for that. So I'm going to give it to Tony so he can discuss, you know, the aspects of a purchase and sales agreement in depth. Again, this would be, normally Tony would be explaining this to buyers. So we kind of just want to have it as much detail as possible. So there you go, Tony, take it away.
Good afternoon, guys. Sorry, I was a little late joining you.
He's in Florida, living his best life.
I'm not sure if someone's unmuted. I'm getting echo of my voice back.
Oh, I don't know. Let me see. Oh, maybe me. Hang on. Can I mute this? Oh God, what happened?
Sorry. Oh.
Mute.
Oh.
Yeah, mute Jamie's gonna mute everybody in just a second, Tony.
Sure.
You should be good to go now.
Alrighty. Again, my name is Tony Popolo. I am an attorney licensed in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. I have been practicing since 2014. And I graduated from Suffolk University Law School. My first job was at American Tower Corporation, which is the largest real estate investment trust in the United States. So purchase and sales. That's kind of the first step where a lawyer will get involved in your life as far as a real estate deal is concerned. And Sarah, there's still I'm trying to just talk through it. I'll try again. Nope, still echo. All right, well, if it isn't bothering people, I'll just try to talk through. All right, let's start with the contingencies in a purchase and sale. So the contingencies as far as a lawyer is concerned, probably the most important thing we need to know from you as the real estate agent. They are the mechanism by which the buyer is able to get out of a sale if they need to. Oh, can people still hear me?
Yep.
You can still hear me? Okay. All right. So let's start with an inspection contingency.
I can't see the slide, but I can hear you.
Yeah, as soon as the slide went away, I could hear myself again. I couldn't hear myself anymore. But I think Sarah can email out the slides. I'll just, I'll kind of go through the talking points. And if anyone has questions, Sarah can provide everyone my email address. I'm happy to go through anything anyone has a question on at any time.
Thank you.
But let's just start with the inspection contingency. So, Sarah had kind of talked to you a little bit earlier about, the inspection, and it's the buyer's responsibility to say they want an inspection. And in this market, as crazy as it is, I've had people waive inspection just because it's something that makes them a little bit more competitive. I don't recommend it because the inspection is really what protects the buyer. So in a real estate deal, once a closing happens, once a deed is passed, basically, if there was something that you could have learned about in an inspection, let's say the chimney leaks or the heating system has too much, carbon monoxide produced to the house. Once you've closed, it's too late. You have no recourse against the person who sold you that house, with some exceptions. So it is really important. And it's basically the portion of the purchase and sale that says, hey, you know what? I have a right to have a qualified inspector come into this property, take a look, and let me know whether or not this is really what you're telling me it is. If you don't ask, real estate can kind of be a don't ask, don't tell kind of world. So if people are not asking the right questions, you may not get the answers that you need to know. And you really need to know this is the largest investment that most people will make in their life. And you really do need to know everything about that property. Otherwise, you're going to have buyers who will be coming back to both you guys and me saying, why did no one warn me that I needed to do this? And it doesn't matter that they told us that, they didn't care about it. They're still going to be upset about it in the end. Another biggie is a mortgage contingency. So a mortgage contingency is the purchase of the purchase and sale that says, I don't have to buy this property unless I'm able to secure a mortgage. Now, this and the inspection contingency create two really important dates that it is the responsibility of the attorney to stay on top of, but it's a good thing for the agent to be aware of as well. So the inspection contingency typically has to be done within 7 days of the purchase and sale being signed. That's kind of usually the standard turnaround time for an inspection. Mortgage contingencies will typically have two different dates. You're going to have the date by which you have to have at least applied for a mortgage. And that's usually earlier than the final date, which is where you're going to have, you have to have secured financing by this date. That's typically usually going to be maybe about a week, maybe 2 weeks prior to closing. Essentially, especially in today's market, a lot of your buyers are already going to come in with some level of application already under their belt. Otherwise, they're not going to be particularly competitive in making offers. So usually you must have at least applied by this date is not a date you're going to have to worry about. It's really going to be more the final date. Okay, are we lined up? Are we ready to close? Those obviously only apply when you don't have a cash buyer, if you have someone who's got a mortgage contingency. And that is a really important question to ask. It's not necessarily into most people in what we do are not buying cash. So there is pretty much a standard presumption that there's probably a mortgage, but there's not always. So it's a good question to kind of ask the buyers, hey, what's going on with the mortgage, if they haven't already proactively offered that information to you. Another contingency that's kind of important in a purchase and sale is what we call the title contingency. So the title contingency is the portion that says, hey, you know what? If you can't deliver good and marketable title, which essentially means, a title that is free from major defects that could be insured for standard title insurance. If you can't do that, then this title contingency allows your buyers to back out of the deal. There's usually also a contingency in there that will say, hey, you know what? If the buyer is willing to accept the title deficiencies, the seller has to spend, usually it's about $2,000. It'll say the seller is required to spend no more than $2,000 to correct any title defects. And I mean, title defects can be a lot of things. They can be, mortgages that were not properly previously discharged. I've run into situations where the mortgage company doesn't even exist anymore, and that can create a real problem. Easements, things like that. And there'll be a section in the contingency that will say the buyer has the sole and absolute choice. If they want to just accept the title deficiencies, they can do that. But it's important to have that language in there, because without that, your buyer doesn't really have any recourse. If the title has a problem, your buyer is stuck, and that can be a real problem. Obviously, like Sarah mentioned, the appraisal contingency. This is a real problem. Like right now, you've got people offering 20, 30, 40% over asking in some instances. And I had a buyer who did that specifically because he wanted to be the top buyer, and he was comfortable with the fact that, you know what, worst case scenario, if the as long as there's an appraisal contingency, you go back to the seller and say, hey, I offered you 270, but it only appraised at 240. I'm going to back out, or you can agree to sell me the property at 240. Like Sarah was talking about with the septic, the seller's not going to go back and remarket the property. Since now there's appraisal showing it's only 240, they're only going to be able to remarket it at 240 anyway, which means they've already got someone on the hook for the same amount of money. But without that appraisal contingency, your buyers don't really have that kind of leverage with the seller anymore, because they offered 270 and now they're stuck. And then you're going to have a pretty angry buyer.
Hey, excuse me, Tony?
Sure. What's up?
So I currently have a home under contract. So if the appraisal comes back, say $10,000 less over what the list price of the home was, at that point, once the appraisal comes back, which should be any day now, we can go back to the sellers and say, listen, the home appraised at X. We offered Z.
Yep.
But now because of the appraisal came back low, we can ask for a lower price now at that point.
Well, as long as you've got an appraisal contingency in there. So if the language
I have a contingency in that purchase and sale that says offer contingent upon home appraising at contract price or over.
Yep. So essentially, what you would do in that situation is go back to the seller and just say, look, we have an appraisal contingency that says the maximum amount we have to pay is the appraisal. The appraisal is lower than our offer. We're not willing to pay the offer. Here's the contingency language that says that we don't. You definitely want to talk to your buyer before you do that, because if you have a seller that just wants to be a jerk, the seller might be like, fine, deal's off, I'll remarket it. Maybe someone else will come along and not put in an appraisal contingency. So before you do that, you really do want to have a conversation with your buyer and say, you know, you do have the authority to do this. Now, the likelihood that the seller is going to back out at that point is probably pretty low, because most sellers are going to know, hey, I've got an appraisal now that says this house is only worth 240. And if I put it back on the market and people start asking me what I think this house is worth, I have to tell them, oh yeah, there was an appraisal at 240, which means they're gonna limit, they're already kind of limited in what they're gonna get anyway, and they're gonna go back to the drawing board by having to relist. So the odds are the seller's not likely to back out, but that's a decision you wanna let your buyer make, because some sellers just wanna be a jerk. And they might say, fine, we'll take you at your offer. You're out of the contract. Have a nice life. At which point, then now you have an angry buyer who maybe spent 9 months and 150 offers to find this house, and now they've lost their house and they're back to square one. So can you do it? Absolutely. Should you do it? Yeah, only if your buyer says that's what they want to do.
But okay, so we're going to find out. Say the home price was $188,000, and my buyer's offered $205, but the appraisal comes back at $188. So, but at that point, we can go back to the seller and say, listen, the home appraised for $188,000.
Yep. As long as you've got the language in the purchase and sale that says this is subject to appraisal at or above, then, or at or below, then yes. I'm sorry, yeah, at or above. Then yes, you have the right to go back to the other side and say, we want to enforce the appraisal contingency, and we want to make an offer at the appraisal.
And then two things could happen. The seller can say yes, or he can say no.
Right. The odds are the seller's going to say yes, but it is a two-way street. The seller can accept the invocation of the appraisal contingency and say, okay, fine, the contract is terminated and we're just going to relist the property. That's kind of biting your nose to spite your face, but you know, there's crazy people out there.
Sure, thanks.
Sure. Anybody else have any other questions about that? Okay. All right, let me go back to, all right. So the home sale contingency. This is another big one. If your buyer is selling a property and they're going to be using that money to finance a portion of or all of the new purchase, then it's important to have a home sale contingency in there, because now you're going to be dealing with two different closings and two different sets of dates on closings. And it's really important because if the home sale gets hung up on something that's out of the control of the current purchase, that can, you know, put you in default on your dates on your purchase and sale on your sale. So if your buyer tells you, yeah, I'm selling this is great, I'm buying my first house and I'm selling a condo so I can buy a house, you definitely want to make sure that, first of all, that it's in the offer, but second, that the attorney knows, because I generally will draft my purchase and sale based on what's in the offer. So if I don't see a home sale contingency in the offer, it's not going to end up in a purchase and sale unless someone tells me. And if it's not in the offer, there's a problem there too. So it really is important to make sure that the home sale contingency goes into the offer, as well as making sure the lawyer knows to put it in the purchase and sale. Because the purchase and sale is the binding contract. The offer, it can't be enforced really. Once the purchase and sale is signed, that's the only thing that matters anymore. So those are really kind of the five big contingencies that you will see most commonly, but there can be any number of contingencies that might be needed in any individual circumstance. So the way I kind of describe my job as an attorney is, you know, I'm kind of like a doctor. I can only diagnose you to the extent of what I know. So if I don't have enough information about your situation, I can't properly treat you. So I would say your situation as an agent for your buyer is kind of the same. If your buyer doesn't tell you why they're looking to buy what they're buying, they might miss a major piece of information that could be a real problem. So I'll give you an example. Sarah and I worked on a purchase of a condo in North Andover about 3 or 4 years ago. And the buyer was buying the property for his mother to live in. She was elderly, and it was a senior community. The problem is he's not a senior and he would be the actual registered owner. And the condo association had rules about what percentage of their units were allowed to be rented out and or owned by someone who was under age 55. Thankfully, this was all discussed upfront. You know, Sarah was very well aware that this home was being purchased for his mother. The seller was aware that it was being purchased for his mother. So we were able to put a contingency in there that said this sale is contingent on the board of trustees of the condo approving him to be able to rent it to his mother, which is not a standard contingency. But it is something that it can come up. So any number of contingencies may be necessary, which is why it's really important. You guys are really the front line of dealing with these, with your buyers. You know way more, you have way more contacts, sometimes way more than you want to have with these buyers. And you know, this is their hopes and dreams, and they're telling you guys about that. So it's really important to know exactly what their needs are for this condo, because if I don't know, for instance, that specific one, if I didn't know that that buyer was buying that condo for his mother and that it was a senior community, he could have had a real problem, because if we didn't have that contingency in the purchase and sale and the board said, no, too bad, we're not allowing you to sublet this unit, he would have been stuck buying a condo that he wouldn't have been able to move his mother into. And that can be that. Then again, that's when you're going to have really angry buyers who may want to sue you, they may want to sue me, and then nobody's happy. So, and then the final piece is the addendum, also called a rider. In New Hampshire, this is pretty much the standard purchase and sale. In New Hampshire, basically the addendum is just where you put everything, and they just use just standard form purchase and sales. And that can also contain any, any kind of contingencies, like, hey, the seller has agreed to contribute $10,000 to closing costs because, we discovered a leaky roof or things like that. So any kind of negotiations that happen outside of what the lawyers may have already done. So like if Sarah or you as agents have this conversation after the appraisal is done and you say, hey, this house needs a new heating system, the seller's agent tells you guys, all right, we'll agree to give you, $10,000 closing costs. You let me know, and then I would make sure it goes into the addendum. The number one big piece is just to understand that the lawyer is there to work for you guys and for the buyer or seller, depending on which side you're on. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Like Sarah said, she's not a lawyer. And yeah, she's right. I spent 6 credits and 1 full year of law school, 1 full year out of 3, just studying contracts. They're complicated. They're really binding. You can be forced to buy a house even if you don't want to. And every word in a contract, even though it may not feel like it, every word has meaning and every word matters. So it really is important to understand everything that you are signing before you do it, and never be afraid to ask questions, and never read the language and say, well, you know what, I'm sure the lawyer knows what he's doing. I don't understand this, but I'm just going to trust the lawyer. If you don't understand something, ask, because that's why we're here. So I will turn this over to say, does anyone have any questions?
No, I'm good.
All right, and well, it looks like, and I apologize, it looks like the echo might have been me. So I apologize for that, and I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Yeah. Hi. Oh shit, I just shared my camera. Oh, I swore. Sorry about all the technical difficulties, guys. I'm a newbie. I've never taught a class before. But I wanted to talk about the inspection contingency a little bit because it's normal. It's very popular to waive, but you want to fully explain the risk that they're exposing themselves to. Because I'm hearing through some inspection companies that they're seeing more and more people get sued because they feel as though, I was misled. I was told that, X, Y, and Z, and now I'm angry because it didn't work out or something's wrong with my house. An inspection is a vital piece, and I feel as though we're in a little bit of an unfair market. Little is a little bit of a downplay of it. So if you can work if you're going to waive the inspection contingency, I would again refer them to an attorney and say, just know, you want to know the scope of of risk that you're opening yourself up to. And that's really that. So again, if you're doing this with a group of buyers, we know a little bit about this, but they know nothing. So Tony does a good job, and I'm sure any attorney that you decide to pair up with and do this with will do a good job of kind of letting them know, what's in the contract. Because as soon as someone hears the word contract, they're terrified, but an attorney should make them feel better.
And just to kind of jump one thing in for Sarah,
Yeah.
and I'm echoing again, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Like I said before, if you don't discover something and you close, I do real estate litigation too. You're screwed. There's very little I can do to help you. If you waive, especially if you waive your inspection contingency, you're done.
Yes. And the title contingency I've had experience with, and it's messy. Luckily, my buyer was willing to take on what was needed to fix it, but it probably took her another year before everything was wrapped up with title. And so that's something that again goes back to, I've said 1,001 times, the expectation. They just you want them to understand before they make any decision, as many variables as you can offer them of what could happen. I tend to over-explain, but it works for me because anytime someone says anything, I'd say 90% of the time I can always refer back to, hey, remember when we had this conversation at the beginning of this process? That's what's happening now. Or, remember that risk I had mentioned that it was a potential, thing? That's what's happening now. But we'll move on to appraisal. The most popular thing that's going on in the market today is an appraisal, if you can get one. So obviously, as you're aware, you guys all are probably familiar with what an appraisal is, but buyers know nothing. So an appraisal is the process of developing an opinion of value for real property using comparative properties, usually sold in the last 3 to 6 months. As you guys know, obviously they make adjustments for time because there was so little inventory that they were having to kind of go farther back up until recently. The buyer is responsible for paying for the appraisal as part of the mortgage process. Around how much is an appraisal?
It's like $500 to $600.
Yeah. So they usually get your card information on the lending side and kind of book it for you. Again, like Jamie had explained earlier, kind of just what their process is on how to get it. It's an unbiased opinion of value. The last time, the housing market crashed was obviously because we had people, the homes were appraising without them ever seeing it for significantly higher than what the true value was. So they've made some updates to that. It can be frustrating for some sellers because if it goes, under what they want for it, it's a frustrating situation they have to deal with. But if the appraisal comes in at a price point that's lower than the offered sale price, buyer and seller can usually renegotiate in this highly competitive market. It isn't unheard of for buyers to pay more cash to supplement for a lower appraised value.
Does the appraisal have to meet the finance amount or the selling amount?
It has to meet, I think that's, selling. So, and honestly, like I just last night put a deal together where the selling agent asked me why I didn't have language on appraisal in there. And it's covered in the financing contingency. If your client, if it doesn't appraise out and the buyer's financing can't come together because they don't have the cash to make up the difference, then their financing falls apart. So I know that it's like the thing right now to kind of add additional language about appraisal, but I'm also wary. There are small things that I'll write in additional provisions that I feel comfortable with. But again, if it's going to be anything extensive regarding something like appraisal, that's such a hot topic right now, I might refer back to Tony or, an attorney to kind of say like what language is going to basically balance between, I don't want to scare the seller off, but I also want to make sure my buyer is protected if they're requesting additional language. I explained to the listing agent, because I'm on the buyer side, that if I were to add any language to the contract, it would be that they would not be purchasing the property if it didn't appraise out. So again, it's not the most popular opinion. I know that sometimes people are kind of like, hey, you want a closing, but let's cut to the chase. Like you want to get paid, but the way you're going to retain business long-term is if you look out for their interests long-term. So I always, again, can't stress enough, I never recommend paying over the appraised value. Unless it's like, we see that the market's increasing, like at the beginning of this, but especially where we're heading towards the peak of the market, and if they're, I just wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it. It's like paying like, hey, this car is worth, $6,000. You want to give me 10 for it? That's how I view it anyway.
I think just to kind of jump in too, I think from our end, I think it's important for them to know that we don't control the appraisal amount.
Yeah.
Like not that we have nothing to do with the appraisal, but all we're doing is ordering it from the lending perspective. So whatever it comes back as, if it comes back under, we'll a lot of the times kind of take the burden of the buyer, but we'll
Explain.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
kind of have to explain to them that we didn't appraise it at that value. It was a third party. So I think that's just important to know if you do have a buyer that maybe doesn't understand or has never been through this, just mention that like it's a third party that's doing this. Like we don't have control. You guys don't have control. It's completely unbiased. And I think that'll help just kind of put their minds at ease. If it does come under that, it's not any of our faults. Like it's not our fault that it came under appraisal.
It's something that is, unbiased essentially. So, and also you want to explain to a buyer, especially where if they're only putting 3 or 5% down, that a low appraisal can affect your loan process. So if you don't have the money to come up with the difference, you want to prepare them because that means they can't buy that house anymore. Because in this market, it's not unheard of for a seller to go turn around and say, you know what, I am going to market it because there's a lot of cash floating around right now. And someone might want this house. I'm seeing there's obviously a little bit more listings coming on in the last few weeks, but when it's scarce and there's nothing, a seller really can essentially get whatever they want because there's more and more buyers willing to waive that appraisal. So this is again, as far as explaining this from the home buyer seminar stance, that's why it's important to have lenders and attorneys on because I wouldn't know their process on that end. And I don't know Tony's process on the attorney's end. I know a little bit enough to kind of guide them, but not enough to, explain. So underwriting, this is for you.
The fun conversation.
The worst part.
of underwriting, the most stressful part.
Yes.
So where I am, Premier Mortgage Lending, like I said, we already have you pre-approved. So we want the buyers to be prepared to provide supporting documents such as 2 months of bank statements, 30 days of pay stubs or your last 2 pay stubs, 2 years of W-2s, and then any sort of government ID just to essentially verify that it's you who I'm talking to. Where it gets tricky there is if they're self-employed, they need a lot more. They need Schedule Cs and tax returns, and it kind of gets it can get tough once you get self-employed because obviously there's people that don't want to pay a lot of taxes, so they make it seem like they're not making a lot of money, but then you can't qualify them for a lot. You can get some frustrated buyers in that sense. But W-2s are definitely easier for us. An important note too is additional documentation depending on your specific situation. That's where a lot of my processing team comes in. I take the first 4 of those, so the bank statements, pay stubs, W-2, photo ID. Other documentation, maybe I didn't get an IRA account for you that you're going to use for your down payment. Maybe proof of that. Even just like proof of that you've had homeowners insurance or proof of what you been paying for property taxes. It may seem weird that you may need stuff like that. But sometimes the underwriters will bring it back and be like, we need this, or there's like these 2 conditions. And yeah, don't make any changes to your life if possible. I shouldn't say don't get a new job because obviously if your job is making you beyond stressed out, you're miserable. I'm not going to sit there and tell you to stay miserable. It just can make our side a little bit harder. It doesn't mean you can't qualify. It just makes it a little bit harder. And then adding new credit cards, buying a new car,
Financing furniture.
Just
Don't finance any new furniture for your new house.
What about so you're trying to buy a house and you're retired, you're saying?
Yeah, I want to sell my house, buy a different house, different area.
That's a good question.
So I don't have a job.
Right.
But I'm staging one.
So it's funny that you say that. First time I actually dealt with this last week. I got somebody. We can use distributions from your IRA or any other retirement account and use that as income. So let's say you have $300,000 or $360,000 to make the example easy. We can divide that by 3 years, divide that by 36. We can take disbursements of $10,000, even if it's just for a month, and say they can qualify at $10,000 a month. So there's ways around it where you don't necessarily need a W-2 or 1099.
Yeah, I know that some people too can qualify based on bank statements. I don't know the details of it, but I don't know. That's just something I heard. Scratch that. Don't say that in your home buyer. seminar. Just say what the lender's saying.
And then, in addition to your down payment, obviously, we're gonna need closing costs, which can get expensive. I don't think it's too bad necessarily. I think it just shocks people how much.
Yeah,
it
I
is.
think it's one of those things in real estate that is never discussed. You know,
Yeah.
that
No.
people don't
Yeah.
talk about closing costs and then you're like, okay, you got an extra $6,000. And especially for first-time home buyers, which is usually the kind of people that are taking in this home buying seminar, it's incredibly difficult in this market because to compete, you have to have a large down payment and then you also have to be responsible for those closing costs. And that can run anywhere between 5. I've seen closing costs. I think that Sarah Herda, the coach that was here before, mentioned that someone got quoted like $27,000 in closing costs.
You guys talk about closing costs this week?
Huh? We'll be here. He'll be here on Friday.
Yeah, I'll be here Friday.
So we'll kind of
dive
just go
into it.
over the,
That's always been something I never quite understood.
yeah,
What exactly are they,
yeah.
and how much?
I
are
can
they,
dive into
how
that
do I
Yeah.
estimate what they are,
Friday.
and so on?
Friday we'll be here for lending. Yeah, so Friday, the whole day will be lending and we'll be discussing kind of all the bits and pieces and,
Yeah.
That would be good.
but that's definitely something that I say this slide, I probably end up stuck on for like 45 minutes because people are like, what are closing costs? Wait a second, this is the first time I'm hearing about closing costs. They cost how much? And in New Hampshire, you have to pay for tax stamps. See, again, I'm not even fully, this is where I rely on my network of people. Like if someone asks me, hey, what are these closing costs? I'm like, you gotta talk to the lender. I have no idea, honestly. Well, I have an idea, but I don't like to say one thing and then have it not match up with what the lender's saying. They're the expert in that, so I just refer them to that expert.
It differs state to state.
Yeah.
Too. Like Mass and New Hampshire, even just like the amount of escrow that we need to collect, the amount of, like she's mentioned, transfer tax in New Hampshire, a lot of people don't know about, and it can add up just relatively quickly.
Yeah.
So it's important to know, and even if you don't know all of it, just like, hey, you're gonna owe roughly this amount, and then, I can confirm or deny whether that is the case. And like you said,
We always tell people it matters on the day that you're closing to because you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a prepaid.
Either you're
Yeah.
paying it now, or you're paying it later.
Yeah.
And a lot of those taxes, it really depends on whether you're reimbursing someone for 3 months, or
Mhm.
whether you're paying, you're closing and you got low closing costs, but now guess what? You've got to pay your whole next tax bill yourself outside of closing.
Right.
Yeah.
So it really does.
right,
And as soon as you start talking about that variation, which could be $1,000,
Yep.
you just throw it back to the lender.
Yeah.
And say, just ask them for an estimated amount of closing costs. No one realizes that you're buying a whole year of homeowners insurance.
Yeah.
Everyone is like, what?
What
That's
is
going
this?
For homeowners insurance. Well, that actually, you're buying a whole.
Yeah.
Well, people don't realize, like, even just like prepaid interest, say you buy a home on the last day of the month, you pay up front the interest for that entire month, which could be at $1,200, $1,100. No, because you technically you owe that money in that time
For taxes.
for tax purposes.
We'll have to
Or interest purposes. sorry.
we'll have to discuss more on Friday in
Yeah, I
depth
get
about
it.
closing
That's
costs.
good
Because
to
that's a
know,
question,
because-
honestly, as a realtor, I don't dive into because I rely on the lender, it's like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. Just that, again, I'm a big, if I don't know, I won't say anything. I don't know.
You know what they bought down.
Exactly.
You could have bought down points.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
yeah.
I get
Yeah.
involved to the extent in which the lender I'm working with wants me to be involved. I don't try to intrude because when I was first in real estate to new agents, I didn't know. So I feel like I was like hyper involved. I was like too involved with the attorneys, too involved with the lenders, and it can make things messy. And I learned in time that just let them know that I'm open. Whatever you need me to do, let me know. I'll chase something down. I'll pick something up. I'll drop it off. I'll explain. But you kind of want to just obviously, as if there's any newer agents on, just discuss with the lender what the expectation is. And I don't know anything about closing costs. I'll be learning on Friday, like with the rest of you.
And then just one final point about just the underwriting, I get the question a lot. It's very normal for you to submit a loan, it to get approved, but for there to be conditions. Like
Yes.
we need these 2 documents. And I think that also confuses buyers because they're like, why do I owe more if the
Mhm.
loan's approved? But it's approved based off of,
Conditionally.
can we get those conditions
Met.
met? So that's very normal again. And again, that kind of freaks some people out. Like, why do I owe more? I thought
Yeah.
we were good to go.
And if you're going back to I want to kind of touch on the competitive buyer. And this is obviously a little bit different. In a normal market, obviously you can request closing costs. Right now, don't, unless you absolutely need to, don't. Exactly.
Buyers
Yeah, yes, it's like, it's very, and so that's again where you want to tailor this to the market that you're in and always kind of stay on top of it. So that's that. I think that's it in underwriting. Does anyone have any questions? All right, cool. Closing. So now everything's all set. There's a walkthrough obviously before closing. This won't be obvious to your buyers. I try to do it within 48 hours prior to closing. I don't love to do a walkthrough on the morning of, just because I have been in a situation where something came up at the walkthrough, and we can talk more about that on Wednesday through negotiating. But we'll do a final walkthrough of the property to ensure it's in broom swept condition and all personal property has been moved or is in the process of being moved. Prior to closing, you will see in person what repairs may have been completed based on your home inspection addendums of your purchase and sales, if any, which is unlikely in this market. Closing will usually take place at an attorney's office or at the county's registry of deeds. And once the paperwork is signed and the deed is recorded at the registry, the home is yours. I also like to kind of emphasize that attorneys are busy. So I'm finding more and more in this market, because they're busy, that they don't usually pick the file up until the week of. So I have buyers that want to know like 3 weeks before, like when and where are we closing? It's like, I don't know. It's subject to what the attorney's availability is. That's why, again, you want to emphasize to your buyers, and what I try to emphasize through this presentation is that it really is a team of people making this orchestrated process come together. It's not just me, it's not just Matt, it's not just Attorney Pablo, it's everybody. And we're all on your side, and we're all here for anything that you need. And just know that, and it's good to kind of let your buyers know in this format that I have resources that can help you, and it makes you competitive against other agents. If you have other agents that are kind of just marketing themselves, and then you have someone who's having this home buying seminar and saying, oh, look at all these resources I have, look at this attorney that's doing this with me, this lender, we have options for you. You're just going to be more competitive as an agent overall. I know that some of this can be a little bit boring, but when you're a buyer and you don't know anything, and especially a first-time home buyer, which is really what this is appealing to, they're excited about everything. Buying a home is super exciting. And so when they see this, that you will get a lot of questions. When the first time I did this, I was super concerned that it was going to be like crickets and we were going to be done in like 20 minutes. But I was surprised at how long it ran. It ran for about 2.5 hours. And I did it at 7 o'clock at night. And I had at least like 15, 16 people. And since then I've closed 3 transactions from it. And that was, I want to say last August. So it's in the long game. In real estate, you want to be thinking about the long game. You want to be thinking about, not just right now, you want to think about later. And these are just good, easy ways, not necessarily easy, but easier ways to kind of, capture a big pool of buyers. And if anyone needs any help kind of putting together some sort of home buying presentation, I would be more than happy to help. Honestly, I put together my piece and then I sent it off to whoever I was working with. I sent it over. Originally, I didn't have Matt. I had another lender, Donna Weinberg. She provided a bunch of information. I updated it with Matt's information this time. So I reached out to him, said, hey, here's my presentation. Can you, make whatever edits you need, or just let me know and I'll fix it for you. So that's, kind of a way that I would be happy to help anyone that is looking to put something like this together. Does anyone have any questions? Probably not. I know it's a lot. What happened? Oh yeah, this is the end. This is it. We closed. We're closed, baby.
One
I'm
point I'd just add. Couple of things. So if you have any kind of transaction that's dealing with a purchase that involves litigation, make sure you talk to your attorney about that. Really unique situations there.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say litigation, I'm really meaning a house that's being sold because the owners no longer belong, and the court had to intervene and force the house to be sold.
That's the kind of like a hot topic right now is divorce transactions. People are getting friendly with divorce attorneys and getting referrals that way.
Talk to your attorneys, call me when you're done.
Yeah. Sorry, Tony, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I'm trying to talk over my own echo. But also another thing that Sarah and I have run into recently. If you have buyers that are buying a house together and they're not married, you should really have them talk to the attorney about making sure they've determined who gets what percentage of the house.
Yes. It's happened to me twice in the last year.
I'm in the middle of two lawsuits right now over that.
Yeah, I mean, because obviously my generation, we don't get married early, you know, people buy homes together before they're married. And now I'm running in, you know, I just turned 30 and all my friends that got married when they were younger, unfortunately are having the misfortune of, you know, breaking their families up. And then there's a dispute on who gets what, you know, and then that's something that unfortunately you can get sucked into as the realtor, because again, you're on the front lines of things, you're discussing their home value, and then they're talking to you about, I really hate them and I don't want to give them 50%. And it's like, you're really going to talk to an attorney about that. So that's something. And yes. So as uncomfortable it may be to discuss it up front, it's a lot easier than dealing with it after the fact. Because again, like people in this situation, in this market, like if you're unfortunately going through a divorce, a silver lining is that you can sell your house for a lot of money. So you kind of want to make sure that, you know, they're not stuck in litigation and then having to sell, you know, especially if there's a financial hardship, if they're selling. And then on top of that, you know, things can get yucky in real estate, and it's our job to kind of just ease them and guide them in the best way. And Tony does a very good job of that. And so does Matt and everyone that I network with, you know, and it's important to not just, I don't want to say just refer any lender, but you kind of want to get meet with them, talk with them, ask them what their experience is, you know, make sure that the people that you're referring are reputable, because that is, again, how you're going to get that repeat business. If you refer somebody that you just met and don't really know that well as an attorney, you know, there's bad attorneys, there's bad lenders, there's bad realtors. You want to make sure that your network is secure and that you're comfortable referring them. I won't refer anything that if I don't know you, I respect the business and I want everyone to make their money, but I won't put my name on something I'm not comfortable with.
That's how kind of we are too.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, think about it, if I mess up the transaction, Sarah's affected by it.
Yeah.
So it's all, like you say, it's all teamwork here. So you want to make sure that you really do have people that you can trust, especially if you're going to refer them and put your name on that. Is definitely important to build relationships with that.
It does make you more marketable as an agent, you know, in my experience anyway, that I've had, you know, these relationships, and they know that like, oh, okay, Sarah probably knows somebody. That's honestly how I get a lot of business, even if it's just like, hey, do you know a landscaper? Do you know this? I try to have like a book of people that I feel comfortable referring, and then I usually get a conversation, and that's the way I stay top of mind. I can't say enough about good things about the Buffini training, but having that network, that's where I learned that, is having that network of people and being able to refer it makes me top of mind. So say I refer a plumber to somebody and then they go to a barbecue and hear someone talking about real estate, I just talk to them about a plumber. So I'm going to be top of mind to them. And that's just a kind of a nice way. And you're helping people. And genuinely, as nerdy and kind of cliche as it sounds, that's why I do real estate. I enjoy helping people. I like to get in it. I like to kind of see people hit their goals. And that's kind of what I see being a realtor as, is kind of, you're guiding them to their ultimate goal of homeownership. It's like probably the number one goal for most people. And it changes their families generationally.
It gives you the opportunity to call them again, one more touch, to say, just following up, how was Mike the plumber? Did he do a good job for you? And then, oh my God, he started this. So that's great, because I always like to hear the feedback and know before I refer them again, because I want to refer them.
Yeah.
I'm confident in it. If someone says, to tell you the truth, you cancel on me twice, I say, oh, well, that's really concerning, because I only want to refer people who give the kind of service that I expect. And then, you know, I will have either a conversation with them or also looking for a new plumber.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And I think that it's a nice way too, if you're uncomfortable with lead gen, which I think a lot of new agents are, it's uncomfortable to cold call people and get hung up on 1,000 times. That's usually something you develop over some getting beat up in real estate for a little bit. But it's a nice and easier way to kind of touch your database and just in it with something, you know, like I'm offering you something, and that makes it easier, a lot more comfortable. That's where that, like, I'm getting off topic, but like even pop by, it's just popping by. Here's this, I thought of you, happy friggin' 4th of July, whatever the hell's going on. And it's just like a nice way to kind of say, yeah, I know. I cannot believe I only said one swear this whole time. I'm really sorry. I have a potty mouth. But I mean, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to let us know.
My original question, but if you're the seller's agent and your clients are in the middle of divorce, but they both are on the deed, who are you representing?
Both.
Both
of them. As far as their divorce is a separate thing. You're hiring me under a contract. Both parties have to agree. They have to sign a listing agreement, and I represent both of them. It can get tough, because then you have the wife calling you about the husband and the husband calling you about the wife, and it's like, I represent both of you. Please help me. So you have to kind of learn how to finesse that a little.
My other question, my original question was, this is for Matt. if you were pre-approved somebody.
Mhm.
And the number that you approved them for, they're kind of like on the edge.
Mhm.
Okay, and you assume a certain amount of money and a certain amount of income and a certain amount of obligations. If they want to buy a property that is in a floodplain,
Correct.
then they're gonna have to buy flood insurance.
Yeah.
Which is a financial obligation above and beyond their mortgage and PMI.
Right.
And conversely, if I were a buyer's agent and I saw somebody looking at a property in the floodplain, and if their finances were questionable, but even if they weren't, I would feel obligated to advise them not to buy in the floodplain unless they had a water dependent recreation they may want.
Right.
To not buy in the floodplain and take that money and tell them, you can take that money through your insurance premiums and apply it towards what you can afford for a mortgage. How does a lender look at that stuff?
So I know from my end, when I pre-approve people, I don't pre-approve them like,
For the property.
That's
subject to-
your
yeah.
finances.
right. But when I'm giving them the top dollar for what they're being pre-approved for, I don't run right up against the top ratio. So let's say they're in a conventional loan and their debt to income is 45%. I'll pre-approve them at like 41, 42 to take into account if something like that
Variables.
happened, right? We're okay. Versus pre-approving them at 44.8% and then a small thing, well, not a small thing, but
Yeah.
something like that comes up, it's like, can't get you that. Either that or we have to put more money down. So I would rather give them the little bit under, because most people are fine with paying a little bit less per month on the monthly payment. And then, okay, if variables happen, it's okay, we're protected by it. So that's how I protect myself, honestly, and the buyer against it, so that there's really no stress.
So a realtor could, or a client could come back to you and say, look, I'm saving money on this flood insurance, can you up my pre-approved amount? So you kind of built that cushion.
I built that cushion into it, right, right.
And you,
You also really should, like, I always call the lender.
Oh,
out
yeah,
every
that's what I was gonna
offer,
say.
Taxes change.
Exactly.
So they wanna say, what's the MLS number, what are the taxes? And, and then they know by looking it up, whether they were also gonna potentially have flood insurance to worry about.
yeah,
Okay, so you kind of like verify, even though they're pre-approved, you sort of verify. it with
Every
everybody.
offer.
Yeah.
The last person
Yep.
I must have done 15 offers for.
Yeah.
And she was looking at Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and every single one, all the taxes changed every.
I was gonna say, that's where it's crucial.
Yeah,
'cause
that's what I was
New
gonna
Hampshire
say.
kills you on taxes.
And
so
if
you gotta
you're-
make sure
if
that-
you're a on the cusp buyer, I tend like at least my relationship with the lenders that I have will usually let me know, like, hey, this person is like by the skin of their teeth buying. I still want them to buy, it's gonna be a game changer for them, but it's also something that you want to have a conversation with them about. Like, this might be a little bit risky, or if you're looking in like say Sandown, New Hampshire, I think my dad pays like $15,000 in taxes in Sandown. You can't
It's crazy.
look in, like, you have to take that into consideration, and you want to have that conversation up front. I'm sure the lender will too, is kind of like, all right, you're doing it, but you're doing it by the skin of your teeth. So, you got to check with me. And again, make it part of your process to check. I talk to the lender too every time I submit an offer, just to say, I send them the MLS sheet and just say, here you go, we're going to make an offer, let me know. And I've had them say like, no.
That's not gonna
Yeah.
work.
The other thing important about that conversation is I have the lender call the list agent every single time,
Yep.
every single one of those offers, so
Yep.
you get on the phone and especially since she was an FHA buyer. which
Oh,
is-
God.
this market has been horrible, which
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We got less than she needed, so she's really
Right.
happy. But he made that call to every single list agent. They had, 15 offers. You're the only call we got, they would say.
The lenders-
She was the FHA.
Yeah.
So the lender calls on this-
Yes. To advocate for them
Okay.
as a buyer, because I also, the lender you choose, I cannot stress this enough. I've had offers accepted because of who my lender was. I've had them almost the exact same offer, and they'll say, well, Donna Weinberg, who I love you, Matt.
Oh,
I
you're good.
worked with Donna Weinberg. Matt's newer. They'll say, oh, I've accepted this offer because I've worked with Donna before and she's great. I know it'll get done. Jay Vogel at RMS is another one. Like, oh, great lender. Because you get to know them.
And the flip side.
Yeah,
I mean,
same thing.
You can have a column with multiple other situations. You've got your lenders in there that are probably Bank of America.
Ooh.
You look at them and you can tell your seller right there, this is a great offer, but Bank of America
Yes, and that's another thing that I try to, you can't, they have to make the decision for themselves, but it's another thing, like they don't know what they don't know, again. And I try lightly to explain that bigger banks aren't always the best decision in this market. Yes, you may be saving on your interest, however, you may not get the house because if you don't meet your financing contingency, the seller, and I think that bigger banks kind of don't understand that we have to get permission from the seller. It's not like, okay, here you go, an extension. They have to sign that and agree to that. And they're not always going to, especially in this market. It's normal to have a backup offer. They can say, no, this person's, already ready to go. No, see ya.
It's funny you say that because I called one of my buyers yesterday. They were the third offer of mine. The first offer was Bank of America. The second offer was DCU, and our offer was like $10,000 or $12,000 under the top offer, and she was legitimately considering mine
Yeah.
because of.
Well, if you're the
They
list
don't
agent, you have to
want to
explain
deal
that
with.
too.
They don't want to deal with banks, especially now. Like they just don't want.
And that's important on the list side too,
Right.
to explain, because
Right.
they kind of see like the number and they're like, ooh, and it's like, oh, okay, well, let's just. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
And I think that when you're also a newer agent, it's harder to kind of see your value, but these people are really relying on you for guidance. They don't do this all the time. They do it maybe, a couple of times in their lifetime. So it's like, you want to make sure that you're securing your information and that the networks that you're building are reliable, again, which I've said 1,001 times. It is, it's very crucial. And you want to be able to kind of explain that to them because your opinion does hold weight. And I know that when I was first starting in real estate, I definitely had a hard time advocating for myself and the resources that I provided. But you want to be confident in that because you spend the time watching the market and doing this. And even if you're new, if you're doing what you have to do and paying attention and taking these classes, you're adding value. You do know, and you have a resource and a network of people that, and even in me or Jamie or anyone here, that can help you. So just know your value and don't second guess it. Do we got anything else? Nothing? Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. I know it's kind of long and drawn out, but I hope you liked it.
Good. See you tomorrow.